back to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World, our 2022 conference. We're joined this afternoon by Gregg Castano. He is the founder and CEO of News Direct, and he is going to speak to us this afternoon on how multimedia helped gains visibility. Gregg, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to your insights and your presentation.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Very happy to be here. Very excited. Okay, well, let me just start off by saying anyone who is an entrepreneur knows that, one of the things that's most difficult about being an entrepreneur, aside from financial part of things, is getting people to know who your company is. It's very important to do promotion and marketing and public relations about your company so that as many people as possible become aware of it. You raise your brand awareness, you raise the reputation of your company, and you start to establish some traction in the marketplace. In today's day and age, that's even more difficult because most of us are kind of besieged with a tidal wave of information coming at us from all directions, particularly on the internet. And the way to combat that in this era of so much information is kind of try to skillfully combine PR and marketing, which are two disciplines which have really sort of converged over the last 5 to 10 years because of digital media and things like that. And it's become a way to kind of promote yourself in the marketplace. And it's a way to be much more creative than you were able to do in the past with kind of more limited tools. So what I'm going to talk about today is how do you use those tools, and in particular multimedia, to really enhance your brand, get your brand known, raise your brand awareness, and so forth, which ultimately leads to what we all want, which is customers and revenue. So let me just kind of share my screen here. Okay, so essentially, from more than 100 years now, companies have relied on either internal or external public relations professionals, whether they knew that they were public relations professionals or not. In essence, they were, to inform the public about information about their company that they felt is important for them to know. They've done this primarily through the filter of the news media. And the news media itself, was kind of the conduit between the companies and the general public and the target audiences of each company. In the picture you're seeing here on the screen is a man by the name of Ivy Lee, and he's considered the father of modern public relations. And he's widely credited with having issued the world's first press release, which has been for many decades the tool that public relations people use to get information to the media and therefore to the public about their company. Now, the first press release that he issued was a result of what was known as the Atlantic City train wreck, which occurred in 2006, in which, unfortunately, a train had plunged off a bridge into a creek that connected Atlantic City to the mainland, and 53 passengers were trapped and drowned. And acting as the railroad's PR representative, Lee advised management to disclose information to journalists before they got it from other secondhand and less reliable sources. Thus, the press release was born, and what you see on the right here is actually the New York Times actually printed in full the entire statement, which we now call a press release, which public relations people today would kill for, to get the newspapers to actually reprint your press release rather than interpret your press release. So that was a major win for him, and he probably didn't even know it at the time. Nearly half a century later, a man by the name of Herb Michel, who, as you can see, looks nothing like Ivy Lee, he founded a service called PR Newswire. He got the idea of delivering press releases to New York City newspaper newsrooms using the same teletype systems that were in use by, at the time, the Associated Press and United Press International and other wire services. And with that, the first commercial newswire service was born. And PR Newswire, as you may know, is still in operation, and it remains the largest such service in the world. They have competitors called Business Wire, who's my former employer, and Globe Newswire, and a number of other smaller players. The marriage of the press release and the available technology of the day eventually grew into what is now a $1 billion global industry. And it has been relied upon by PR and corporate communications professionals for the nearly 70 years since the invention of PR Newswire. However, as we know, a lot has changed in those 7 decades. And the most profound change occurred in the mid-1990s with the advent of something we're all familiar with, the internet. And I think without exaggeration, it's fair to say that the internet is probably the most disruptive force within the communication space, especially that ever occurred, really, in anyone's lifetime. And as I mentioned before, PR people throughout the decades have needed to tell their stories through the prism of the media, because that was the most effective method of communicating with target audiences. Getting covered by a journalist brought with it a strong measure of credibility, which we now today in the industry is known as objective third-party validation. And that's something that advertising, for example, could not deliver. It did not carry the same trust as third-party validation. However, and somewhat ironically, the internet's disruptive nature was no more evident than in its effect on the media and on journalism. The biggest casualty of the internet, as you may know, was the newspaper industry, which was once the most authoritative and most trusted publicly available source of news and information. The internet has decimated newsrooms on a mass scale, causing thousands of long-established newspapers to fold, significantly shrink, or retreat into online editions only. Major contributors to this decline were the emergence of online news sites such as Yahoo, as well as the enormous growth of social media, particularly platforms such as Twitter and Facebook. As a result, there were far fewer newspapers, or fewer journalists to cover news, and therefore it became much more difficult for PR people and their corporate clients to get coverage. And today we call that coverage that's covered by a journalist, we call it earned media. Combined with the exponential increase in news releases that are being issued over commercial news wires like PR Newswire, the ability to break through all this clutter has become almost impossible, particularly for startups, which is virtually impossible for startups to break through unless they have something incredibly, newsworthy, which most startups are really kind of in their own niche, and they don't have that sort of news. They might get coverage in trade publications, but it's very difficult to get coverage in mainstream media. However, the internet giveth and the internet taketh away. While bringing traditional media like newspapers to its knees, it also simultaneously both created and necessitated alternative means of reaching target audiences by PR people. So the second phase of the internet's dominance came with what we now know as the digital revolution. All right, and the digital revolution began somewhere, I would say, in the late 2000s, meaning around 2008, 2009, 2010. And what that brought with it was the ability to easily and inexpensively produce non-text, highly sensory and engaging formats, such as video, infographics, GIFs, and even interactive images and photos. And these things online seduced the generation that we now refer to as millennials. And millennials, in the wake of that, have eschewed the written word in large part in return for gathering their information and their news via digestible, short-form multimedia content, which they now see as their primary source of news and information. And most of us have sort of come along for the ride with them. Additionally, the rise of in popularity of online news sites that post press releases and other non-journalistic content, Yahoo being one of them. You can go to Yahoo Finance and you can find press releases there that were distributed by PR Newswire and Business Wire, Globe Newswire, my company, News Direct. They automatically post those news releases. So those are kind of not coming from journalists, they're coming directly from the companies. So also social media platforms that allow companies to speak directly to their audiences and their followers. So this enabled the PR profession to begin circumventing traditional media and basically going over their head, communicate directly with their audiences. But the volume of information remains very, very high and remains a problem for PR people to deal with, to again cut through that clutter and get your message heard by and seen by the target audience that you are trying to reach. So that brings us basically to the subject matter of today's session, which is using multimedia to effectively tell your company's story. And I'm going to start with the word story here, because what we're really talking about is digital storytelling. Whatever information your company may want to provide to the public in whatever format it's in, and through whatever media you choose to communicate it in, it should always be viewed and created in the context of a larger narrative for your company. So this requires a strategy that's thought through in advance about the overall message you want your target audiences to perceive from your communications efforts. It's about establishing, reinforcing, and sustaining your brand or your corporate identity through which your individual messages are interpreted. So there needs to be a common theme or a feel woven throughout your specific messaging that connects back to the overall perception you're trying to create and maintain among your target audience. So any company seeking to have its message penetrate through all of this interference must now engage in digital storytelling. Now, messaging, that's not to say that the written word is dead or it's going away. It's still, messaging should be conducted through words, of course, but only to a degree, because words, especially in the form of press releases, should only be part of sort of a mosaic of formats used to effectively establish, reinforce, and sustain your brand identity. Despite all the obvious trends that we're seeing, news consumers continue to be barraged daily with reams and reams of written information, most of which, as we know now, they no longer have the time or the attention span to thoroughly read through. As a result, those readers, if you will, have strongly embraced multimedia as if not the primary means of ingesting news and information. And it's replacing or at least marginalizing written content. In direct response, journalists whose livelihood depends on attracting and maintaining readers, and I use that term loosely, have had no choice but to respond in kind. And as such, they seek and even demand multimedia content from the companies they cover. And that's important to know from the standpoint of the company. Additionally, it's important to consider that most journalists are writing, if not just for a print audience, but also for online audiences. And thus it's essential for them to employ as much multimedia content as they can, because this attracts and keeps readers. The reasons are simple. The eye is quickly and invariably drawn to a colorful multimedia image over words on a page or a screen, as you can see here. Even just these kind of fake images are more interesting to look at than this block of text. Secondly, a great deal of information can be provided, or a significant impression can be made or formed in a matter of seconds or minutes with multimedia versus a relatively lengthy amount of time it takes to read a press release or an entire news article. The third reason that many news consumers find their news, the third reason here in terms of why you should use multimedia is that many news consumers are looking for news via search engines, and Google being the most dominant. And it is an established fact that Google algorithms favor multimedia, especially video, over text content, which means that multimedia content will rank higher and therefore be seen and viewed far more extensively than text will. So, I mean, there's your answer right there, case closed. Given all these factors, it's obvious that using multimedia, particularly video, and I want to emphasize that, video is really the most important type of multimedia, the most important format. It gives your messaging a far greater chance of being used by journalists and viewed by target audiences. Let's take a look at a few stats to kind of prove this point. Viewers retain 95% of the video's message as compared to 10% of the message if it's written in text. Users spend 88% more time on a website that contains video. Video generates 1,200% more shares than images and text combined. That's photos and text. 88% of PR specialists today say that digital storytelling is the future. So basically that means there's really no excuse not to use video, right? Video content is relatively easy to create. It's not expensive. Everyone, I think one of the drawbacks that people see is that they think it's expensive and difficult and requires a certain amount of expertise. But with the new technology and video making programs available, it's virtually effortless to make and create video on your own, and it no longer requires expensive high-end equipment. Just basically a built-in webcam like we're doing right now on either your computer or your smartphone. And additionally, there are many video apps and software and so forth that exist to enable you to easily enhance your videos to have sort of a professional standard look to them. Video content is rich. The brain processes visuals 60,000 times faster than text. Video uses visual aesthetics rather, and audio to paint the whole picture and better convey the whole story than text can. Then lastly, video is good business. The bottom line literally is the bottom line, right? All corporate communications efforts at the end of the day are designed to sustain and grow your business. Multimedia, and most prominently video content, can boost conversions, drastically upgrade brand awareness, and generate new business opportunities, which is entirely the point of why you do this in the first place. So the more you rely on a multimedia strategy and use it as a business tool, the better your results will be. This should be built into your company's public relations or corporate communications DNA and done routinely on a regular basis. And you should track the analytics to determine and validate the effectiveness of your efforts. So it's really about engaging your audience. Nothing engages your audience better than multimedia, and certainly within multimedia, nothing engages as strongly as video. So that's it.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate the fine presentation. The retention percentages there are pretty compelling, huh?
Absolutely. I mean, it's as there are stats out there that tell you that something like 75% of humans are visual learners, and what you're really trying to get them to do is learn about your company, right? So you have to use visuals, you have to use sensory content to really get them not only to read it the first time or view it the first time, but to keep coming back and wanting to see more. That's what draws them back, and that's why it's important for journalists, right? Because journalists don't want you to come to their whatever publication they're working on to that online site and view it once and disappear and never come back. They want you to keep coming back for more. So it helps you attract journalists and possibly enhance your chances of getting earned media coverage, but it also allows you to go around the journalists and go directly to the viewers that you're trying to reach in the first place, and attracts them.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've been in the capital markets for a good chunk of my career, and when I was at the NYSE, the press release was king, right? It was all about
Absolutely.
press release, and it had to be in a certain format, and it had to come out, and only certain providers were quote unquote approved providers, right? And you could disseminate through those handful of people, right? We would walk in most mornings at 6:30, and there'd be 600 press releases we would have to review on no less than probably 5 fax machines.
Right.
Making sure, well, is this material news? Should we open the stock or not?
Yeah.
What shall we do? And then watching that evolve, even over certainly the 18 years I was there, where all of a sudden then you developed kind of data rooms and press rooms and ways to electronically submit it. And then even in the engagement function with your shareholders, your investors, your stakeholders, watching the evolution of even just the annual report becoming multimedia was also fascinating. GE was well publicized. They kind of went from like the 10K, and the annual report went from like 495 pages down to like 240. And they started to embed videos and links in it, and charts, and
you didn't want to be a commercial printer during that time. We lost a lot of
No,
people.
well, that's true. You went from right. You went from developing your typical type of book all the way through. You know, one of the interesting things too with multimedia and any kind of piece is you always have to, certainly from a public company standpoint, be mindful of your disclosure responsibilities. Make
Mhm.
sure that if this is in fact a material event and you have to file an 8K
Mhm.
with the SEC, you're obviously going to tie into that as well. And it's also interesting too, and maybe you have a comment on this. When I first started, I remember, the communications department, the IR department, PR department, they were traditionally filled with people with more of a journalism background, right, a media background. And then you started to watch it over the course of, I was there 18 years, and to this day now, 25 years later, you look at the communications person. That person really needs to be well tooled in what makes the company tick. That person needs to be a journalist, uh, a writer, a finance professional. I mean,
Mhm.
and really a connector, right? Who do I go to for the information at the company, right?
Mhm.
Learning those relationships and who's the person that's going to best help me in my job.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you look at large companies now, especially, there's a pretty much of a divide between the corporate communications side and the investor relations side. And the corporate communications side, generally speaking, still has a lot of journalists, kind of ex-journalists, I should say. The investor relations side is a lot of those people start out as accountants, and they have to really thoroughly understand the numbers, and then they have to develop the skill of a public relations person to be able to communicate that information with journalists and with the public and with obviously with shareholders. My company News Direct, as well as the other wire services like PR Newswire and Business Wire, they do address those issues, right? They do meet disclosure requirements. They do allow you to do the things you need to do to stay compliant, and also to promote your company, right? One of the things that we did at News Direct was kind of take it a step further on the multimedia side, which is why this was the topic I chose. Because one of the things we can do is we can distribute multimedia without embedding them in press releases, which is the way it's been traditionally done. So you can take, whether it's investor relations or corporate communications or public relations, you can now distribute, other formats other than straight press releases that might have embedded content and just distribute the content. So that is kind of the point of my presentation, in that that's what gets people's attention now, because they're flooded with all this textual content that it's impossible for them to read through. So they need to have these short form, highly informative, top level sort of, formats. Infographics are very effective as well, to a certain degree, and a lot of banks and things like that use that in their earnings releases. You still need the numbers, and you still need the charts, and you still need some of the text, but you need to kind of put that together and have a strategy around, incorporating it all into one, overall message.
Yeah, infographics are a great example of that. Traditionally the government always used that, right? The CDC put out, and now
Right.
and now and now regular
Right.
commercial companies are doing it because it's what you said kind of in your opening remarks, or early in the remarks. It really is about the storytelling, isn't it?
Right. Exactly.
Getting,
That's what it is.
I mean, the rules are the rules, and you have to obviously be transparent, and you're going to follow all of the disclosure protocols. But getting that story out, trying to be an advocate as best you can, really is the name of the game, right? Because if the
Mhm.
search engines, as you said, are really more partial towards video and those types of pieces, then you don't want to be at the bottom of the search engine pecking order,
No,
for
look, if
sure.
you're not in the first 3 or 4 on Google, nobody clicks on it, right? So you need to be.
No, no, absolutely. Well, listen, Greg, thanks for joining us today. Great job.
Thank you.
Very nice presentation. Very informative. Thanks for joining Leading Entrepreneurs of the World, our conference
Thank
here
you.
this year, News Direct. We look forward to seeing you in the future. And thanks for contributing today.
All right. Thank you very much, Glenn. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Have a good day. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.